Major Lindsay and Africa presents Bouncing Back, Conversations about Resilience for Lawyers.
Welcome to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. This podcast is brought to you by Major Lindsay and Africa, the global leader in legal search and consulting. I'm your host, Rebecca Glatzer. I'm a managing director in the associate practice group at Major Lindsay and Africa. In this podcast, you'll hear me speak to successful professionals about the hiccups, bumps, bruises, and setbacks they've experienced in their careers and personal lives, and you'll learn how they ultimately bounced back from those experiences to thrive. Today, my guest is Justice Leah Ward Sears, former Chief Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court. In 1992, after 4 years as a Fulton County Superior Court judge, and at only 36 years old, she became the first woman and youngest justice appointed to the Supreme Court of Georgia. In 2005, she was elected by her peers as Chief Justice, becoming the first African-American woman to serve as Chief Justice of any state Supreme Court in the United States. After her term as Chief Justice ended, Justice Sears entered private practice. She is currently a partner at the Atlanta-based firm of Smith, Gambrell Russell, where her practice focuses on complex litigation and appellate work. Justice Sears received her undergraduate degree from Cornell University, her JD from Emory University School of Law, and received a Master's of Laws from the University of Virginia Law School. Justice Sears is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority and the Quill and Dagger Society. She holds honorary degrees from Morehouse College, Atlanta University, LaGrange College, Piedmont College, and Spelman College. She serves or has served on the Board of Trustees for Emory University, the Carter Center, the Oakland Cemetery Foundation, the Georgia Historical Society, and the Boy Scouts of America Atlanta Area Council. Justice Sears, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Oh, thank you so much, Rebecca. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm excited to have you here. I know our listening audience is going to get a lot out of this. The way I wanted to start, in a prior conversation, you had mentioned to me that one of the profound events that shaped your life was your divorce from your first husband. Tell me a little bit more about that experience.
Well, I mean, it was, I had a lifetime of, my life as a younger person wasn't necessarily easy, because I grew up born in 1955, and I had to live through the whole civil rights struggle, at least one of the first civil rights struggles, not the first, and then the women's movement, and being an African American woman, I had to kind of struggle to get along, but I'd never experienced a personal failure like that. I had, and that's what I deemed it at the time. I got married at 20 years old, and then had 2 children, and then by 40, the marriage was unraveling, and I divorced. I actually divorced within a year or two of getting to the Georgia Supreme Court. So while I was the youngest justice on the court, I ended up being a single mom for a few years until I remarried. I wasn't a single mom, and to the extent that my ex-husband was out of my children's life. He never was, but it was a profound failure in a life where I thought if you just work hard, you can make anything go. And I realized that that's just not the case.
Right. And let's see, there's so much to unpack here. It was. I think as women, and you can please correct me if you disagree, we tend to personalize things that are not always our fault. That's a societal conditioning, right?
I think that's probably the case. I don't know if it's a woman's thing, but it's definitely, I've seen more women do it, and it's definitely something I do. If I'm not successful at it, it's because I didn't work hard or I didn't do something right. And that hasn't necessarily, now that I'm a little older, I can see that there are sometimes forces that, you have to step aside from or do things a different way. And,
Yes.
I mean, I actually thought, Rebecca, that some of the discrimination, a lot of the discrimination I felt coming along was because I wasn't a good person, or, I didn't fit the norm, whatever the norm was. And I just couldn't see that it was just racism or sexism, that kind of thing. I don't do that as much as I used to. And I'm kind of grappling now with the fact that I may have wasted a lot of emotional energy trying to fix myself when it was really other people or things or organizations or systems that needed to be fixed.
Absolutely. And you were, this is interesting to me for a bunch of different reasons, but, society, you grew up or spent a large chunk of your formative years in Savannah, Georgia,
Right.
and, in the Southeast. We all sort of understand the history of the Southeast and segregation and the civil rights movement and so many other things. And it's interesting because it's like you're an adult at this point, right? You're incredibly successful in your career. You have two beautiful children. And the divorce, of course, understandably so, feels like a failure. And you, for good reasons at that time, kind of personalized it, and I as a failure. And I'm wondering, at what point or what was it that helped you, or what things, it might have been more than one thing, kind of helped you realize that there were some forces greater than you that were impacting your life in these nefarious ways, and made things very hard and more difficult than for someone who wasn't a minoritized person?
That's a very good question. It just took time and knowledge. I never wanted to be a victim I think part of my problem was I didn't want to be a victim. And maybe part of my problem was I thought I could control everything by just work, or change this or change that. And I've been very successful. Working and changing this and changing that and bending here and bending there. Uh, and maybe it was because I had been so successful that I thought anything can be done like that. You can do anything. And
Right.
Yeah. And so it took some maturity and some therapy and some good friends and a new marriage and just time, but a lot of maturity. I'm 65 now, so I've had a chance to look back and all of that to know that you can't fix everything.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
father died when I was 32. 30. Yeah, I was 32 years old. He was 62. And when I found out he had renal cancer, I was just 32 now. I thought, well, a Superior Court judge. I just gone on the Superior Court bench. I was able to do that, which was like at that time at 32, Black female, that was just unheard of. So I'll fix my father's cancer. And that I couldn't do. That was out of my hands. That was,
Right.
you can't
Right.
control. Yeah, right. You can't fix everything. And so, I'm married to a man now who keeps emphasizing that, this is not yours to fix. This is just how things are and all that. And I understand that more clearly. It's actually a more powerful way of being. And the young people coming along now. I hope they understand that faster, because there is going to be suffering in life. There are going to be recessions. There are going to be ups and downs and all of that kind of thing. And you will rebound from it, and it's not your fault.
Yes. And so if I were to summarize what you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's one, learning to sort of control the controllables, and there are going to be things in life, whether it's a divorce that requires two people to be involved in that relationship. And if just one of them or both of them are, have differences and need to go their separate ways, that's not necessarily the fault of one person per se. And then, if it's illness or it's economic disaster worldwide, or if it's a coronavirus, these are things that we cannot fix as individuals. And it sounds to me like, you're telling our listening audience, the young lawyers in the audience, control the controllables, right? Control what you can control.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, really, Rebecca, work hard to control the controllables, because there are going to be, this is what I tell my children who aren't children, if they're 37 and 34, but I tell them, work hard to control what you can control, because there are going to be uncontrollables that you can't control. So if you're, and you will have those. So if you are a mess because you messed yourself up, and then you've got a pandemic and all, that kind of thing, then you've got to do the best you can with what you can, and then let the other chips fall where they may. And you'll be better off if you've done your homework, controlling the controllable. If all of this makes any sense. So
no, it does. It absolutely does. It echoes, some of the advice of some of the other folks I've spoken to on this podcast. And it actually, interestingly enough, I'm going to show my nerdy side right now. In preparation for this podcast, I've done a lot of academic reading on resilience, people who study resilience for a living. And, that is one of the sort of hallmarks of people who are resilient, is sort of, when they're trying to bounce back from difficult experiences, one of the key things is, focusing on what they can control, and kind of how one conceptualizes a difficult experience actually has a lot to do with their ability to bounce back. And I think this kind of gets to that point, which is, you can't get overwhelmed by the things that you cannot control, because that puts you in a sort of dark place where you have no efficacy, right? But if you, say to yourself, I can imagine a younger Justice Sears saying, well, okay, I got two kids I got to feed. I got a new household I got to deal with. I have this thriving career and I want to continue to thrive. Let me just focus on work. Let me focus on this. Let me make sure my kids are happy. And everything else, I can't control. I'd imagine that was kind of running through your head at that time after you did the, initial grieving process.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, and then, I had other people I had to be concerned about. So, and by the way, and I know you're not, I'm just throwing this at, wellness is important. So it was at my divorce, or at the dissolution of my first marriage, that I really started taking more time to take care of myself, as opposed to just going at it like, just work, going at it full speed. Taking a breather, doing what works for me to feel better about myself. I don't meditate and do some of the other things like my husband does, but I do use massage therapy. I read a lot of books like Apparently You Do. That's my nerdy side coming out. And I talk to people, and I try to keep a tight network of friends and family around.
Yeah, definitely. The social help, having a network of people that you can rely on to be your honest self, which is another resiliency thing. You actually anticipated my next question. Justice Sears, I was, going to say to you, at what point in this sort of work, provide for the kids, make sure all the trains are running on time, do you sort of carve out time for yourself? But it sounds like you figured that out, and it comes in a form of massage and having, friends to talk to you, and doing reading, carving out time to be with your own mind and read and contemplate and think, because, if you're just going all the time, sometimes you don't get a moment to really think about, how do I feel? Like, what am I feeling like right now. And, lawyers are the worst in this regard.
Yeah.
The billable hour requirement is not kind when it comes to, the care of oneself. That's not the message that we get, in lawyer land. So, I think it's great that you figured that out at an early age. One other thing that the academics, the ones who study resilience for a living, say is that resiliency is not per se innate. I mean, there may be some genetic components to it, right, in terms of whether someone is prone to resiliency versus not prone to resiliency, but that most resilience is in fact learned, is what the literature says, and that if someone has a very difficult later in life experience, whether that be illness or divorce or a firing or whatever,
Right.
that typically those who bounce back from that, and don't turn to, substance abuse or deep depression or other things, the reason they do it is because they saw resilience in their formative years, or they experienced lessons in resilience in their formative years, or they learned from watching someone else be resilient. And so my next question for you is, where does your resilience come from?
I think going to the research that you've done is doing a lot of hard work. I don't think I have the natural DNA resilience. Maybe I do. I don't know. I do think I have the natural DNA to find out how to make things work. And I could tell I didn't have what I needed to have. And so I decided to work on it. And I've worked on it my entire life because I knew, I don't know, it was just very important to me. It was very important to my, to be able to get along in life. So I've always been, I know I'm very self-reflective, maybe too self-critical, and I didn't want that to kill me. So I've always been working. You have to do the hard work to get the resilience muscles going, so that you know where to put things where, this is important, but this is not so important. That doesn't come so easy to me. Too many things are all important. And the other thing I've been working on the last couple of years, Rebecca, is learning how to say no. Just no.
Yes.
As a woman, I do think this is a woman's thing. People ask you to do all kinds of things. Just, they'll say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I know you're overworked, but would you do this for me? Would you be on this? Would you do this, do that?" And I won't. Somebody told me once they'll jump on you, ride you, and then when you break down, people will just jump on the next horse and ride that. And so I've learned how to say, just no, I can't. No, I won't. No, I will. Not no to everything, but no to things that, where you're just at the end of it, in terms of I've had too much on my plate and I can't take much more, and be healthy. So
yeah, that is a good point, and it's there's been some work done, sort of research about the legal industry, the legal community, and law firms specifically, and how minoritized younger associates, as they're sort of coming up before they make partner, and even after they make partner, and let's be honest about this, are often asked, in these large systems where that's, a university or a law firm, because there aren't as many of them, whether that be Black associates or LGBTQ associates, are often asked to do what I'm going to call like service work, where it's work that's important, whether that's, like recruiting, right, other minoritized associates, whether it's being on a panel, whether it's like maybe in being involved in some of the attracting of clients, kind of, the sort of dog and pony show that happens when you're going to a first-time client. And they're pulled in on this stuff, right? Which is, again, important. I don't want to kind of downplay the importance of this kind of thing, but it's not the work that's valued and rewarded in a law firm, right? Making rain is what is rewarded in large part in a law firm. And I'm wondering, what your advice might be to someone who's young, on the younger side of their career, they're a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth associate in big law or small law, and they're being asked, in addition to billing the hours and doing all the other things that are required of their job, they're learning, they're doing, they're billing, but they're also being asked to be sort of pulled in all these other directions, which again is important work, but there's got to be this struggle, and I hear from associates all the time about this struggle, about how to make it all happen. There's only so much time in the day. What advice would you have for them as they're trying to sort of navigate this push and pull?
Well, okay, that's an excellent question, because that does happen in law firms. And I think firms need to either monetize the very, very important work that isn't sort of the metric, the billable hour type thing. It's valuable, but it doesn't show up on your metrics, your list of values. It's maybe off to the side as non-billable kind of work, or not even listed at all. So that firms have to either begin to monetize it, or if they don't, and most don't, they just give lip service to it. Don't do it, or do enough to be a good firm citizen, but you can't let it take over your life. And I see it mainly of women who are more than happy to, it's like the women do generally, lick the envelopes and stuff the envelopes and all that kind of stuff, but they're not out front getting the accolades. They're not the candidate. They're not out front. They're asked to do the very important work of the groundwork, but they're not paid for that. I mean, just even sort of women that work in the home, they do extremely important work, but they're not paid for it. Now, I'm not suggesting that they should be, but it's not as valued as the guys who work outside the home. I see this in law firms all the time, with more women working on recruiting and mentoring and all this, taking up tons of your time that they're just not going to get paid for.
That's right. That's right.
So you've got to, if you're not paid for it, I would limit it until they pay you for it.
Yes. And it sounds like, you're saying too, prioritize maybe what's important to you, or what, again, you will be valued for, and you got to sort of push back. You got to learn how to push back on the rest of that, and even at a junior level, for sure.
I mean, some of this work, Rebecca, because I'm in the same category. I get a lot of, I do a rainmaker, and I do billable hours, but I'm asked to do a lot of work that is valuable just to me personally, but I also think it's valuable for the firm I'm with. I do feel I'm compensated for it, but I do a lot of it because I think it helps my quote brand. It's helpful to me personally. But I also think it's helpful to the law. It's like even doing this. I think it's helpful that you have a partner from Smith, Gambrell Russell sitting down with you. And I don't think it'll hurt the firm. I think it'll be good for them.
Yeah, and I definitely think your knowledge, and the fact that, you know, quite frankly, there's some things that change over time, and there's some things, unfortunately, that have not. And, you know, this push and pull for both minoritized and female attorneys, some of whom are minoritized and female, you know, this is till the end of time. I hate to say it. I wish that things would change, and I think they slowly are. But, you know, this sort of old school rubric of really focusing on rainmaking, you know, it can be detrimental to folks that really don't understand either how law firms work and what they prioritize, or again, for folks who have just a difficult time saying no.
Right.
And it sounds like you're saying, learn that lesson earlier than I did. Like,
Yes,
learn how to put it back sooner. It will help, you know, with a world of stress and anxiety and, you know, physical health and finding time to do the things that truly matter.
right.
I did want to go sort of backwards a little bit in our discussion. Just, you know, you sort of, again, alluded to the bias, whether that was because you're female or because you're Black over the course of your long and storied and very impressive career. And, you know, in 2004, this is public knowledge that, you know, your reelection to the Georgia Supreme Court, what is typically a nonpartisan thing, was contested by the Georgia Republican Party and the Georgia Christian Coalition. And, you know, they worked really hard to defeat you back in 2004, but you killed it. You won that election with just 64% of the vote. And I'm wondering, you know, what that experience was like for you. You're at the pinnacle of your career. You're one of the youngest Supreme Court justices, state Supreme Court justices in the country. You know, what you've done and what you've accomplished is like unheralded at that time. I mean, it's like unprecedented and incredibly impressive, and a testament to your hard work and your brilliance and your knowledge of the law. And then this happens, and I'm just curious, you know, kind of what was going through your mind at that time and how you sort of conceptualized what was happening.
It was, I had gotten a call from a friend that this is when I first found out that the Republican Party and the governor of the state, Sonny Perdue at the time, were angry with me. Much of it had to do with a decision that the court had come down with earlier, year or so earlier. And there was this guy named Roy Moore. He was a former judge out of Alabama who kept putting the Ten Commandments in front of the Alabama Supreme Court bill. He ultimately ran for Senate and lost, a racist guy. And then he came to the Christian Coalition in Georgia. And I got this message that, you know, they're at the Christian Coalition meeting, and they're saying they are going to mount this effort to defeat you. You don't have, quote, Georgia values, in large part because of my views, my written views on the court on LGBTQ rights, which were a little more progressive than, I mean, they're mainstream now, but at the time I was really, I guess, viewed very differently, very left wing. Again, they're mainstream views now. So
Right.
I was surreal, like, you know, young woman. I'm like, the governor is trying to defeat me. This is unbelievable. But what you do is you just put your head down and keep running and keep working, because nobody can outwork me. I'll tell you that. So it was surreal.
I believe that.
Yeah, no, it was surreal, but you just do it. And in the end, I did win. And, you know, I've had, Rebecca, a great life and a great career. And if I hadn't had those things happen to me, I wouldn't have a professor, Rebecca Davis out of Georgia Southern, decided to write a book about me because of all that. And, you know, I get opportunities to speak to you, Rebecca, And I just had a wonderful, wonderful career based in large part on the mountains I've had put in front of me that I've had to climb. So, success, somebody said this, I didn't make it up, but success comes from failures, not from other success. So,
Yes.
having to climb all those mountains actually was a good thing, although I'll tell you at the time it didn't feel like that then. So,
No.
but looking back, and I'm thinking about this maybe for the first time just in talking with you. Wow, it was probably some of the best things that ever happened.
Success is really not about how many times you fall, but how many times you get up. And you sort of keep taking the hits and persevere, and you become stronger for it. I was curious. I know that you are a faithful person, and I'm curious. How. I'm asking you off the cuff for the first time about this. We didn't talk about this in our prior discussion, but I'm wondering how your faith may have bolstered you, over the course of the years. I'm particularly sort of thinking about this case that you alluded to. I was a young attorney, kind of watching on the sidelines. We talked about this before. I was in the closet at the time when I first started practicing in my career, and I remember just being so happy because you had made a sort of a stand about, your thoughts about LGBTQ rights. And I felt very gratified because way back in 2004, it wasn't okay, and it wasn't as mainstream to be supportive of LGBTQ marriage. It wasn't legal in Georgia at the time. It subsequently has become legal. We were sort of grandfathered in, but I'm just sort of interested in the role that your faith may have sort of taken, in your ability to bounce back from these difficulties.
Well, it plays a heavy, it's extremely important to me, that I know that God walks beside me in everything I do. And I try very hard. I don't always make it, but I try very hard to be his mouthpiece on this earth. I want to do what he would want me to do, to make him proud of what I'm doing. In terms of talking about, going to the LGBTQ issues, but that's another example, Rebecca, of if I had not been born Black and female and suffered as I had growing up, I would not be, I wouldn't know, may not have been attuned to the fact that I didn't want any other group to have to suffer like that. And so I think that my suffering informed that. Oh, I'm very sure that informed my position on those kinds of things. So you see, it's almost like God gave me stuff to teach me. So I'm sure of that, to teach me. I would,
absolutely.
Yeah, so I would it's not just for me, it's got to be for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, whether you are, subscribe to a particular faith or one considers themselves, as I do, more spiritual in nature. I'm Jewish, but I wouldn't say that I'm particularly religious. I'm more spiritual. But the universe is kind of teaching us lessons all the time.
Yes.
And I feel like you got to be listening to if you got to sort of quiet yourself and quiet your brain and sort of pay attention, because there's lessons everywhere. And I think it's, sort of profound what you said about, if God hadn't made me who I am and it had me come in the body and the form in which I am here on this earth, I probably wouldn't have understood a plight of LGBTQ Georgians, and you applied that knowledge, and I think that's admirable, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Well, I don't want to keep you. I sincerely appreciate your time, and I have a final question for you that sort of applies to what's happening these days. The past 12 months, some people it's been 18 months, has been quite difficult for a lot of people, but especially young, newly minted attorneys. Many of them have been furloughed, laid off, had pay cuts, uncertainty about their careers and personal lives. And many of them, especially the super young ones, the millennials and the Gen Zers, were too young to be impacted by the Great Recession, at least directly. Maybe their parents were, but most of them were not in the workforce at that point in time. And so they don't necessarily have a point of reference for what they're experiencing, particularly, lawyers are type A go-getters. Most of them have had no problems, like you alluded to, academically, and are just excelling classes. And then all of a sudden, bam, life sort of punches them in the face here. And I was wondering, what sort of advice you would give to these young lawyers, particularly ones that are sort of questioning their career choice. What advice would you have, and what resources would you point them to kind of steel themselves and figure out how to carry on?
The advice I would have is that the persistence is the key, and life is cyclical, and what goes up must come down, and all of that, and this too will pass. It really will, and it will be. I think we will have learned a lot from this bad period of racial reckoning and pandemic and violence and all of this stuff. I hope that we will have learned a lot from it, and we will go forward stronger. That's my hope. And you've got to take the best out of it, because there's a lot of good stuff that will come out. Even the technology, just a simple, well, it's not that simple to me, but even the way we moved forward in terms of technology, and I've learned a lot of how to get things done faster, easier than what I was doing a year ago. So resources, my biggest resource is I read a lot of, believe it or not, I read a lot of, and don't laugh at me, but I like Dr. Seuss, who kind of has and other children's books, like The Little Engine That Could is probably my favorite. You just think you can, you think you can, you think you can, you think, can you get your muscles going?
Yes.
And at some point, it just is automatic. But you've got to work on it. We were talking about.
I think these are great lessons. I mean, this reminder that this too shall pass, and life is cyclical. And those of us who are a little bit longer in the tooth, saw this situation. It wasn't exactly the same, but the Great Recession, and people who've been practicing it longer have seen economic, problems in the past too, and you learn lessons from it each time, and it sort of steels you, and you get stronger because of it. Well, thank you so much again, Justice, for your time and your honesty and your forthrightness. I know that the young attorneys who are going to have the opportunity to listen to this podcast are going to learn a lot from your advice, and I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for listening to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. Join us next time for another story about thriving after overcoming challenges. You can find Bouncing Back and other programming for lawyers on MLA's Legal Talk Network.